It was a quiet morning in a cozy cafe nestled on a bustling street in Los Angeles. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on the chatter of patrons sipping coffee. Among them sat a man whose presence radiated a quiet charisma, Dick Van Dyke. At 98, the beloved actor exuded energy and charm, smiling at strangers as he enjoyed his coffee. The peaceful atmosphere was suddenly shattered when a loud voice echoed across the room. "Who do you think you are, sitting here like you own the place?" A man in his 60s stormed toward Van Dyke's table, his face red with anger. Every head turned. Gasps rippled through the cafe. The stranger jabbed a finger toward Van Dyke. "You think being a Hollywood star makes you better than the rest of us?" For a moment, silence hung in the air like a heavy fog. The room braced for confrontation, but Dick didn't flinch. He looked up at the man with calm, twinkling eyes. "Well," he said softly, "it seems like something's troubling you, my friend. Want to sit down and talk about it?" The room froze. Nobody expected kindness. What was about to unfold would leave everyone shaken. As the angry man hesitated, the cafe door swung open again. In walked none other than Donald Trump, his iconic red tie in place. He scanned the room and spotted the scene unfolding. "Dick Van Dyke?" Trump exclaimed, striding over with his booming voice. "What's going on here?" The stranger stepped back, startled by the former president's sudden entrance. Trump turned to Van Dyke, his expression softening. "Dick, you're a legend. Are you okay?" Van Dyke chuckled lightly. "I'm fine, Donald. Just a little misunderstanding." Trump turned to the angry man, his tone firm but measured. "What's the problem here? This man has brought joy to millions. You think yelling at him is the answer?" The stranger stammered, his anger faltering under the weight of the attention. Van Dyke interjected. "Let's not gang up on him. He's clearly upset. We all have bad days, don't we?" The words hit like a gentle wave, washing over the tense room. Even Trump seemed to pause, considering the wisdom. The man's lips quivered and tears began to form. The room held its breath. The stranger's voice broke as he spoke. I just lost my job. My wife left me last week. I've been walking around angry at the world. I didn't mean to take it out on you." Gasps echoed through the cafe. The man's vulnerability caught everyone off guard. Van Dyke smiled warmly, his eyes shining with compassion. "You're carrying a lot of pain. I can't imagine how heavy that must feel." Trump, surprisingly, nodded. "I've had my fair share of rough patches too. Believe me, life can knock you down hard, but it's not about staying down. It's about getting back up." The stranger wiped his eyes. "I'm sorry. I really am. I shouldn't have lashed out." Van Dyke reached across the table and patted the man's hand. "Forgiveness starts with yourself. Let's sit together for a bit. Share your story. You're not alone." The cafe grew eerily quiet as emotions swirled. People whispered, tissues dabbed at tears, and strangers exchanged knowing looks. Nobody expected a morning coffee to turn into a life lesson. The man sat down, trembling. His hands, weathered and calloused, gripped the edge of the table. "I haven't always been like this," he began, his voice heavy. "I worked for 40 years, doing my best for my family. But when the company shut down, they let me go, like I didn't matter." Van Dyke leaned forward, his face filled with understanding. "Losing your sense of purpose can feel like losing a part of yourself. It's not easy." The man nodded, tears pooling in his eyes. "Then my wife said she couldn't stay. She said I wasn't the man she married. Now, I'm just lost." The cafe grew quiet as customers leaned in to listen. Even Donald Trump, often known for his larger-than-life personality, softened. "I know what it's like to feel the world turn on you," Trump said, his voice unusually tender. People think success means never struggling. They're wrong. The man's lip quivered. I lashed out because I saw you, Mr. Van Dyke, smiling like life was perfect. I couldn't take it. Van Dyke placed a steady hand on the man's shoulder. Happiness isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise. The atmosphere in the cafe shifted as Van Dyke's words sank in. Strangers once preoccupied with their own conversations sat silently, moved by the raw exchange unfolding before them. A woman at the back of the room dabbed her eyes with a napkin. My husband lost his job last year. I understand what you're going through, she said softly to the man. Another customer, an older gentleman with a cane, chimed in. When my wife passed, I thought I'd never smile again. But you find ways to keep going. Donald Trump stood tall, his voice carrying a surprising note of humility. We've all faced storms. The key is not to let them break you. This man here, he gestured to Van Dyke, has seen nearly a century of life. He knows what he's talking about. Van Dyke chuckled. Life's not about the years, though. It's about the moments, like this one, where we come together. The man who had started the commotion buried his face in his hands. I've spent so long being angry. I forgot how to feel anything else. Van Dyke smiled. You've remembered now? That's the first step. Van Dyke's gaze drifted to the old piano in the corner of the cafe. His eyes twinkled. Mind if I play something? He asked the manager, who nodded eagerly. He walked over, his movements light despite his age. Sitting down, he placed his hands on the keys and began to play. A familiar tune filled the air, Chim Chim Cherry from Mary Poppins. The song's magic seemed to wrap around everyone in the room. People hummed along, some wiping tears from their eyes. The man who had yelled earlier sat frozen, his anger melting into awe. Donald Trump, standing by the counter, tapped his foot in time with the music. You've still got it, Dick, he said with a grin. When the song ended, the cafe erupted into applause. Van Dyke stood, smiling warmly. Music has a way of reminding us that even in the darkest times, there's still light. The man who had started the day in anger now looked up at Van Dyke, his face wet with tears. Thank you, he whispered. You've given me something I thought I'd lost, hope. The cafe had become more than a place to grab coffee. It was now a sanctuary of shared humanity. The man sat still, the echoes of the piano melody lingering in his mind. He stared at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. I don't deserve this kindness, he muttered, his voice barely audible. Van Dyke, standing tall despite his age, returned to the man's table. Everyone deserves kindness, especially when they're hurting, he said gently. The man shook his head. I've hurt people too. I yelled at you, and for what? My anger isn't your fault. Donald Trump, leaning against the counter, chimed in with an uncharacteristically thoughtful tone. We've all made mistakes, my friend. The difference is what you do after. Do you let them define you, or do you rise above them? The man looked around the cafe, noticing the faces of strangers who now felt like companions. I've been so stuck in my own pain that I forgot the world didn't stop for me. Van Dyke smiled warmly. Recognizing that is the first step. Now, it's time to take the next one. The man's tears fell freely, and for the first time in years, he didn't try to hide them. As the cafe settled into a thoughtful quiet, Van Dyke glanced at the man. Do you know why I smile so much? He asked. The man shook his head. No, but I wish I could. Van Dyke chuckled softly. It's because I've lived long enough to see the power of gratitude. Life has thrown its share of storms at me, loss, pain, doubts. But each day I find something, no matter how small, to be grateful for. That's what keeps me going. The man blinked. Gratitude? Even when life feels empty? Trump nodded, surprisingly in sync with Van Dyke. Gratitude changes the game. I've had times when the world felt like it was against me, but stopping to appreciate the little things, family, health, even a good cup of coffee, helped me refocus. A young barista stepped forward, her hands trembling as she held out a cup of coffee to the man. "This one's on me," she said softly. "You reminded me of my dad. He's struggling too, but he's trying." The man's lips trembled as he accepted the cup. "Thank you," he whispered. "I think I'm finally ready to try." The man sat quietly, sipping his coffee as the cafe buzzed around him. He felt lighter, as if the weight of years had finally begun to lift. Van Dyke leaned back in his chair, his eyes twinkling with satisfaction. "See? When we open ourselves to others, even the darkest days start to brighten." Donald Trump, standing nearby, folded his arms. "You've got a rare gift, Dick. Not many people can take a tense moment and turn it into something beautiful." Van Dyke smiled humbly. "It's not about me. It's about all of us. We each have the power to choose kindness over conflict." The man looked up, his face soft with gratitude. "You've both taught me something today. I can't undo the past. But maybe I can start over." Van Dyke nodded. "That's the beauty of life. Every day is a new chance." As the man stood to leave, the cafe erupted into spontaneous applause. He turned, his face glowing with a mix of humility and hope. "Thank you. I'll never forget this." The room was left buzzing with emotion, every heart deeply moved by the extraordinary exchange. As the man left the cafe, the room remained silent, as if everyone was holding their breath. Dick Van Dyke looked out the window, watching the stranger walk away with a slightly lighter step. "Dick," Trump said, breaking the silence, "you've always had a way of getting to the heart of people. How do you do it?" Van Dyke smiled. "I think it comes from living long enough to understand that everyone carries a story. Most of the time, what you see on the surface is just the tip of what they're feeling." A woman at a nearby table chimed in, her voice trembling. "My father used to say the same thing. He passed last year, but he would have loved this moment." Van Dyke nodded, his expression softening. "Our loved ones leave a mark on us. It's in the way we treat others, even strangers. That's their legacy." Trump looked down at his hands, uncharacteristically quiet. "You know, even in my busiest days, I tried to hold on to that idea. Sometimes I forgot. But moments like this remind me why it matters." The cafe was filled with memories and emotions, each person reflecting on the invisible ties that connect us all. A young couple approached Van Dyke's table, their faces full of awe. "Mr. Van Dyke, we didn't mean to eavesdrop, but thank you for what you did. It felt like you were speaking to all of us." Van Dyke gestured for them to sit. "Join us. What's on your mind?" The woman hesitated, then said, "We're struggling right now. My husband lost his job and we're expecting our first child. It feels like the world is against us." Trump leaned forward. "Let me tell you something," he said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "When I started out, I made mistakes, big ones, but I learned that every setback is a setup for a comeback. You just have to keep going." Van Dyke added, "And remember, you're never alone. Even in the hardest moments, you have each other. That's more valuable than anything." Tears welled up in the young woman's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "We needed to hear that." The cafe felt like a gathering of souls, each person sharing in the quiet power of hope. The energy in the cafe shifted again, from reflection to action. Inspired by the exchange, people began sharing their own stories. An elderly man spoke of losing his wife, but finding purpose in volunteering. A barista revealed her dream of becoming a writer despite her struggles. Van Dyke clapped his hands together. "See? When we share our stories, we heal together. Every one of you has something to give, something to teach. Trump, now fully engaged, nodded. That's true, and it's never too late to start making a difference. Whether you're 25 or 95, there's always a next chapter. The cafe erupted into applause, not for Van Dyke or Trump, but for each other. The room buzzed with an electric sense of unity. Van Dyke stood, his voice carrying a quiet strength. Let's take this moment with us. Let's remind the world what kindness can do. The crowd, moved beyond words, rose to their feet in agreement. Strangers became friends, and the cafe became a symbol of something much greater. The young couple stayed a little longer, captivated by the warmth in the room. The man who had yelled at Van Dyke earlier re-entered the cafe, his face hesitant but determined. "I couldn't leave," he said, his voice steady. "Not without saying thank you properly." Van Dyke smiled, his eyes crinkling with kindness. "No thanks are necessary. The fact that you came back means more than words." The man took a deep breath. "There's something else. The truth is, I used to watch you all the time with my dad. Mary Poppins, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. They were his favorites. He'd sing the songs, trying to make us laugh. I've missed that so much since he passed." A gasp rippled through the cafe. The man looked down, tears streaming down his face. "I've been carrying so much grief, I didn't realize it had turned into anger. Today, I finally let it go." Donald Trump leaned forward. "Grief is a heavy thing, my friend. But you don't have to carry it alone. That's what people like your father would want, for you to remember the good and let the pain fade." The man nodded, and the room swelled with emotion as he wiped his eyes. As the room absorbed the emotional moment, a woman sitting quietly in the corner rose. She adjusted her scarf and looked at the man. "I know what it's like to lose someone and feel lost yourself," she said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "I lost my daughter 2 years ago. I thought I'd never recover. But you reminded me today that we all have a choice, to keep their memory alive in love, not pain." Van Dyke approached her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You're absolutely right. When we remember the joy they brought us, we honor their lives." Donald Trump stood and addressed the cafe. "This is why moments like this matter. It's not just about coffee or conversation. It's about connecting with each other. We're stronger together." The woman sat back down, her face softened by the collective support in the room. People began sharing hugs, smiles, and quiet words of encouragement. As the man who had yelled at Van Dyke turned to leave, he paused. "I'm not just leaving here today," he said. "I'm leaving behind the anger I've carried for years. Thank you for showing me how." After the emotional exchange, the cafe felt different, lighter, almost sacred. People lingered, unwilling to break the spell of connection. A barista walked over to Van Dyke with tears in her eyes. "I was going to quit this job today," she admitted. "But watching what happened here changed my mind. You've reminded me that what I do matters." Van Dyke patted her hand. "Everything matters when done with heart." Trump chuckled. "That's true. Sometimes the smallest acts make the biggest impact." A young boy, no older than 10, approached the piano. "Can I play something?" he asked timidly. Van Dyke smiled and stepped aside, gesturing for the boy to sit. The child played a simple melody, and the cafe fell silent once more, tears welling in the eyes of nearly everyone present. When the boy finished, the room erupted into applause, not for the performance but for the bravery it took to share. Van Dyke turned to the crowd, his voice steady and filled with emotion. "This moment, right here, is proof that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves. Let's carry this forward." The cafe became a beacon of hope, its light touching everyone who walked through its doors. As the evening deepened, the cafe began to empty, but a core group of people remained, unwilling to leave the warmth of the shared experience. Dick Van Dyke, seated near the piano, hummed a familiar tune from Mary Poppins, his eyes sparkling with a quiet joy. Donald Trump, who had grown unusually reflective, leaned closer to Van Dyke. "You know, I've been in a lot of rooms with powerful people, but this feels different. Real." Van Dyke smiled. "Real connection always feels different. Fame, power, they don't mean much without it." The man who had yelled earlier stood near the door, watching with a hesitant smile. Before leaving, he walked up to Van Dyke one last time. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay you," he said. Van Dyke shook his head. "There's nothing to repay. Just pass it on. Kindness is the only debt worth paying forward." As the man left, the cafe owner approached, holding a framed photo of a young Van Dyke from the Dick Van Dyke Show. "You've always inspired me," he said, his voice breaking. "Tonight, you reminded me why." As the night wore on, Van Dyke and Trump found themselves sitting in silence, watching the few remaining patrons. The young boy who had played the piano earlier ran up to them, holding a small sketch he had drawn. "It's you," he said, handing it to Van Dyke. The sketch was simple, but heartfelt, capturing Van Dyke's kind eyes and gentle smile. Van Dyke looked at the boy, deeply moved. "This is beautiful, thank you." Trump laughed softly. "You've got fans of all ages, Dick." Van Dyke chuckled. "And each one teaches me something new." A woman approached the table, tears in her eyes. "I came in here today feeling hopeless," she admitted. "But watching you handle that situation reminded me of my father. He was just like you, calm, wise, and full of grace." Van Dyke took her hand gently. "Then you already have his legacy in you. Hold on to it." As she left, Trump leaned back, his usual bravado replaced by genuine admiration. "You've got a gift, Dick. The world needs more of it." Van Dyke smiled. "We all have gifts. The secret is knowing when to use them." The cafe owner dimmed the lights as the last patrons filtered out. Van Dyke and Trump stood by the door, watching the night unfold outside. "Funny how one moment can change everything," Trump said, his tone uncharacteristically soft. Van Dyke nodded. "It's never too late to make a difference." The cafe owner locked up, thanking them for the unforgettable evening. "You've given us a memory we'll carry forever," he said. As Van Dyke and Trump walked into the crisp night air, they exchanged a look of quiet understanding. "You know," Trump said, "I've been through a lot in my life, but tonight reminded me what truly matters. People, connection, and hope." Van Dyke smiled. "Then, let's make sure we spread that wherever we go." To my viewers, if this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what moved you most. Your stories matter, and together, we can create a community of kindness and inspiration. Let's pass it on, just like Dick Van Dyke said.